Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Florida Family Therapy Alliance. I am Dr. Annalyn Schooley, and today I am welcoming Eduardo Marrero, who I have known for, it's more than 20 years now, right? 30
Oh,
years?
wait, yeah.
Way long
Uh,
time when you were a master's student, I believe.
that's when we met at school, yes, but I did my first internship when I was 17 at Center One, where
I've
you
known
worked.
you since you were 17.
Hmm.
Okay, now I feel really old. Okay, but anyway. Eduardo has been an MFT in the South Florida area for a
Hmm.
long time, and now is in Colorado.
Yep.
And so, cue the picture of the mountains and things like that behind you. So, and you have taught on somatic therapies
Hmm.
for quite a long while, if I recall.
Hmm.
All
Yep.
righty. So this is an overview of somatic therapies and some details on a couple of the specific ones. And I'm so excited to have you present on this topic. Thank you, Eduardo.
No problem, no problem. So, welcome everybody. So, a lot of what I do somatically, I'm trained in EMDR, I'm certified in EFT tapping, but I'm familiar with a lot of the somatic therapies. I have my LMFT, of course, and a lot of the work that I do is combining that stuff. And I've worked in a lot of community mental health agencies. I've run a lot of programs, I've run a lot of agencies. And so it's been an outcropping of all of that varied experience. I will go to share now. Let me see. I have to be a co-host. And we lost Alexis. I'm sorry. So, Brianna, feel free to hop in with questions when we're presenting. It's a nice one-on-one teaching. It's great. All right, so let's go in here, share. And what I will be sharing is my larger presentation for EFT tapping, but I've added the slides that are specific to expanding on some of the knowledge around the other somatic therapies. All right, there we go. Technology will work soon. All right, here we go. So this is me. I give a special thanks to Lori Layden, who trained me in the EFT tapping. And you'll see me skip through a bunch of slides because when I give this presentation to larger groups that are specific to EFT, I do a lot of trauma education. So it's all about how, what trauma is, all of the markers, how memory works, the trauma capsule, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. All of these things are important in somatic therapies. So what we're talking about today is brain-based somatic release therapies. So somatic basically means body. So you can do breath work, you can do meditation, yoga, all that stuff counts as somatic. What we're talking about today is somatic therapies. So we're going to do a basic compare and contrast. So when we're looking at cognitive approaches, the focus is on how the thought influences emotion and behavior, so think, feel, do cycle, versus in the somatic therapy, the focus is on how the body influences the thoughts, the emotions, and the behaviors. In cognitive approaches, of course, we help identify distorted cognitive beliefs, target reduction of the symptoms, help create more adaptive self-beliefs and behaviors, and we rely on insight as well as behavior change. Somatically, we help people become more aware of their body sensations and procedural memories. We target underlying dysregulation in the nervous system that causes and maintains those symptoms, and we rely on body awareness and physiological regulation. So some examples of somatic release therapy techniques are EMDR, brain spotting, somatic experiencing, tapas acupressure technique, and EFT tapping, which is the emotional freedom technique that we're going to kind of specialize in a little bit later. Hi, Shirley. Nice to meet you. Welcome. So we're going to talk a little bit about EMDR in an overview. And again, for Shirley, Brianna, and Alexis, hop in with questions because these are just brief overviews. So if you have specific questions about EMDR or any of the other somatic therapies, ask. The only one that I'm going to be delving in largely unprompted is going to be the EFT tapping at the end. So originally it was named EMD. The process was founded by Francine Shapiro, who passed, I believe, last year, the year before. And in 91, she changed the name to EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. Her adaptive information processing model basically states that EMDR facilitates the access and processing of traumatic memories and other adverse life events to bring these adaptive resolutions. It's believed that through the process of bilateral stimulation, whether it's the finger across, the light across, the tapping, or the little clickers, we're able to effectively relieve stress and negative beliefs, and all of that stuff is reprocessed. EMDR therapy uses a three-pronged protocol. The past events that have been that laid the groundwork for the dysfunction are processed, forging new associative links and adaptive information. The current circumstances that elicit distress are targeted, and internal external triggers are desensitized. Imaginal templates of future events are incorporated to assist the client in acquiring the skill needed for adaptive functioning. It's an interesting model. When you're doing EMDR on a scale of 0 to 10, the sweet spot is around 7 to do the float backs. And it's how would I put it? It was interesting to do the trainings. It was interesting to practice the model. It was interesting to experience the model, and a lot of people have positive results from it. But I've had a few therapists tell me that they had negative responses to it as well. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag. A lot of the techniques that are used when someone is dysregulated are Ericksonian based. So it's that hypnotherapy kind of talk with the grounding. That's EMDR. Do you guys have specific questions about EMDR before I move to the next somatic piece? If you don't, we're good.
Oh no, I'm good. I was just trying to take everything in.
Oh, no worries.
Let me ask you a question.
Mhm.
Do you feel that this or have you seen through the course that you was doing it that this has been an effective model to use?
EMDR was interesting. When it goes good, it feels a little like magic. When it goes sideways, it does not feel like magic at all.
Okay.
I've had therapists who it did not go so well with that described it as kind of being trapped in in a really bad state. A lot of that I attributed, knowing a lot of the somatic practices, I tend to attribute that to the fact that you need them at a 7 level, 0 to 10 to do a solid float back. In some of the other models, if you were to scale the emotion, you scale it up to 2, and that's when you do some of the processing. So you're holding a lot of fire with EMDR. When someone's dysregulating or reacting, you really, it's hard to do just go with it. Just go with it. It's an interesting practice. Shirley, you were going to say something?
Yeah, actually, I have a question too. So, as a somatic-based therapist, because I have a lot of peers that are trained in EMDR, but they aren't focused on somatic.
Yeah.
It's a two-part question. How will you know what therapeutic modality to begin with, and how do you know if it's working or not for them?
You're talking about specifically with EMDR?
EMDR, brain spotting, somatic
Okay,
experiencing,
all right.
EFT, like
So,
how do you, yeah.
Okay, so that's a good clinical question closer for the end, but I'll answer it now since we're all clinicians here. Usually I'll identify a client as someone who's good for somatic work when we engage in so as a clinician, we know sometimes we work with other clinicians or other people who are very cerebrally engaged. They can tell you all of their triggers, all of the root causes of everything. They will run the gamut. And a lot of the dance is around avoiding emotion or avoiding staying in their body or avoiding staying present. So I like to do that 180 intervention. I like to pull in the body stuff when I see that their mind is just working way hard. If I find myself laughing and bantering and having a good time with them, I'm going to pull in a somatic therapy because I'm dealing with an Olympian. Their brain is already set up. Like it's I would say the clients that I have the most fun with tend to be the clients that I go towards somatic work with, because I recognize that there's guards at the gates. They're not necessarily a client for shifting in certain ways, and the somatic work tends to, hit them backwards. Like they don't know what to do with it. It's another way to access. So when we're looking at cognitive work versus like somatic work, talk therapy tends to work from like a top-down model. we're up here in the brain and we're kind of like looking at everything. We're doing a tour guide of our life, of how we are, how we interact. Somatic work tends to start with that body process. What are we feeling? Where are we holding it in the body? What's the emotional resonance to something in my past? Things that you tend to uncover in brain spotting or EMDR or even in tapping is when in any of these models you go to, hey, when was your earliest memory of feeling tension in your chest with anxiety at a 3 or whatever it is. With the somatic therapies, my clients tend to resonate with memories that they probably wouldn't have thought of when they're thinking of those logical connections. Like if someone has a fear of public speaking, they're going to think of, oh, the first time my teacher rejected me. When we're doing, tapping or even the EMDR, they'll float back to a memory of their earliest time holding tension and fear in their chest. And it's not always a memory of public speaking. It's something else that's connected with their present physical state. So that's the cool thing about it when you're working with those high thinking clients. Did that give you an answer, Shirley? Yeah, okay. Okay, so somatic experiencing is another somatic therapy. It was founded in 1977 by Dr. Peter Levine. The underlying premise here is that humans possess the ability to physically release energy from stress. He kind of got this observation after watching cheetahs shake off, their FFFF response when they were hunting prey. This practice posits that through building a strong rapport, slow starting and exploring issues around the trauma, and then building resilience to productively engage and physically release the trauma, a client can effectively work through their presenting issues. SE is designed to resolve traumatic stress and increase the capacity to negotiate stress and trauma by helping clients negotiate and understand their own extraception and intraception. And extraception is basically your 5 senses. Interoception is your heart rate, if you're sweating, you're breathing, all of that, what's happening in your body stuff. And it kind of help when you're working with a client, you're teaching them a little bit how to plug back into what's going on in your body. And when you have someone who's into a lot of problem talk or problem saturated narrative, sometimes they'll run through 18 different things. Their body's seized up. They're sitting there with their shoulders up to their ears. And they're like, no, I feel fine. I don't feel anything at all. So, with SE therapy, it's a slow walk. You're slow walking someone to get them into this communal space of learning around, this is what your body's experiencing. This is what's happening. This is what's going on. And then starting in a neutral space with their trauma narrative. So if they'd gotten into a car accident, you might start the conversation by saying, what did you have for breakfast that morning? And then what was that like before you got into the car, and just really just going into it until they build up enough resiliency to go through the process and then eventually go into some kind of release of their trauma. Did I skip a slide? Oh, brain spotting. So brain spotting. Were there any questions about somatic experiencing before I move forward? No. Shirley, yes.
Sorry, I usually wait to the end.
It's okay.
I've never heard of exteroception being described as our 5 senses. I always heard
of it as our interoception is inside the body, like alexithymia and the autonomic functions, but exteroception is outside of the body. And I'm thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, the 5 senses are all external, aren't
Yes.
they?
Every single one of
so
them.
I'm just to make sure, like I'm just having this like 2-year-long moment of holy shit, this is how you explain exteroception. Oh.
Yeah, I could write 101 books on a bunch of stuff. So can Anna Lynn. If you know her, you know she's really good at, bottom lining it. Brain spotting, as a brief overview, it was founded in 2003 by Dr. David Grand. The underlying premise here is that by identifying brain spots, which is a point in visual space that a client has a strong reaction to, that clinicians can work through and process the trauma or presenting issue. The focus is on the subcortical brain, which is similar in all somatic therapies, and how it organizes itself around that eye position. The work is done after identifying an activation or a resource spot. A lot of the language with EMDR or brain spotting is about resourcing, so there are softer ways to approach things. In brain spotting, resourcing is a little bit different than EMDR. So I'll kind of juxtaposition a little bit. I'll give an example in EMDR resourcing. So if I'm working with a kid and we're doing EMDR, I might say to them, okay, so remember, if let's say they're lacking courage or bravery, I'll say, okay, so out of all your make-believe characters or toys or series or things that you watch, who's the bravest? And they'd say, oh, Wally the walrus. I'm like, all right, so I want you to picture Wally. And I'll sit there and kind of turn the gain up on everything. So it's almost like taking that memory and making it technicolor. So I'm asking them to really describe Wally, hold on to that feeling of bravery. Let's just ratchet it up. What's it like if the bravery is just radiating? And then take a snapshot. So I'm resourcing Wally. And and then I'm going to test to it and say, all right, so let's think of your problem. Now let's bounce back to Wally so that they have the experience of that little bit of anxiety and then that bravery. And then we're taking that snapshot, we create that resource. This is really, really just dumbing it down. I can create a whole zoo with little kids of all the different resources, all the different animals. We can just, we can name them, we can call them up when they need them. If they're starting to abreact, bring Wally into the room. How does that impact what you're feeling? So, going through that whole piece. In brain spotting, resourcing is the idea that if I have a spot that is an activation spot, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety, or the anxiety is higher when my eye position is here, I can find another spot where calm is higher. So I'm finding another spot to look at that makes me feel safer. So it's resourcing in a different kind of way, but both are driven by the notion that the client within themselves has the tools to self-soothe. And as a practitioner, I can help guide them to those tools. I can help them identify those tools. I can help them just bring those tools forward. So that's comparing the two. But in brain spotting, they actually also do bilateral sound. So you'll wear, some soft headphones where you can still hear the clinician, but there's, sound going back and forth. The idea is that bilateral stimulation helps to process stuff across the brain. This practice also posits that by identifying brain spots, you target an area of focused activation in your brain directly related to the issue you're working on. While you focus on that brain spot, you notice your body sensations. And then you're able to navigate and process the negative emotions to help rewire your brain to more positive associations and feelings. So that's brain spotting. It's very interesting with the little antenna and finding the spots. I have colleagues that swear by it. It was an interesting experience. But yes, so that's another somatic therapy. And somatic therapies kind of run the gamut, similar to cognitive behavioral therapies. You'll have, let's go through a spectrum. Let's say you have a hypnotist who's a psychoanalyst who does past life regression. And then you have someone who's solid CBT. There's this big gamut, you have systems work, you have lots of stuff on the continuum. With somatic work, there's also a continuum too. So for instance, tapas acupressure technique was founded in 1993 by Tapas Flemings. The underlying premise is that the practitioners work with their client by channeling putative energy. And so you'll hear a lot of stuff about chakra work and energies when you're exploring tapas acupressure. The practice posits that self-application of light pressure on 4 areas of the head, while placing attention on a series of verbal steps, releases emotional blockage and allows for healing. The TAT combines holding acupressure points and going through a series of 9 statements. The 9 statements it's just steps. The steps are going through the problem, talking about the opposition condition, the places, origins, forgiveness, all of the parts of you that are involved, everything that's left, choosing, and then integration. So yes, there's lots of steps to that. It kind of just falls on the other end of that continuum when we're looking at all of the somatic therapies. And then EFT tapping. EFT stands for Emotional Freedom Technique. It was founded in the 70s by Roger Callahan, and it was called Thought Field Therapy. And there were a lot of steps to it. It was very, very acupoint specific, acupressure point specific, and the protocols were very involved. It later was called EFT tapping by Gary Craig when he simplified the protocols and kind of put it out there for everybody. The underlying premise is that by stimulating acupressure points on the body, the client can create physiological release by stimulating the body's release of the FFFF response. So that's fight, flight, freeze, faint, yes, and fawn. Yeah, there's a fifth F.
Oh, what's the difference between faint and fawn?
What do you mean? Oh, so fainting is that the old school thinking of animals like pass out. Fawning responses, you'll hear a lot about fawning responses when it comes to victims of sexual trauma. So for instance, let's say I, as a child, went through sexual trauma, and I find that a lot of the way that I relate to people is through flirting or through sexual connection. These are all fawning responses. You know, it's kind of based in that idea that I'm making myself pleasing, but it's in order to kind of sate that FFF response. So it's a trauma response. It's not just me being slutty. Just a bottom line, Matt. So did that make sense for you, Shirley? Was I a little too bottom line of it? Do you need it more technical than
No,
that?
I know
Okay.
a lot about fawning. I just didn't understand. That sounds like freeze response to me, like feigning death.
Oh, I thought you said faint. You meant feign, F-E-I-N. Okay.
Oh, I
Yes,
that one I don't
yes.
know.
No, it's okay. It's all right. It's just hearing. So hearing. So we're good. We're good. So sorry for explaining the fawning response that you already know. So the emotional freedom technique is a brief novel intervention that combines elements of exposure, cognitive therapy, and somatic stimulation. It's often referred to as psychological acupuncture, and it uses 2 fingers in the tapping process with a cognitive statement. So it's based on a synthesis of Chinese acupressure, cognitive restructuring, and mindfulness. It's said to re-regulate the amygdala, which helps to unblock the FFF response. And we're going to get into EFT now. So as I'm presenting, for sure, ask questions. Were there any other questions about the somatic stuff? Because I know I kind of ran through it. And hi, Caitlin. Welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Shirley?
When you were using numbers, was that based on SUDS?
Yes, subjective units of distress scale. Awesome. Yeah, most of the somatic therapies do the 0 to 10 scale. So we're in EFT tapping, for instance. If I were to do just the tap and breathe, which is the first protocol, I might do it on 0 to 10, rate your restriction of breath. When we're getting to any of the emotional stuff that you're going through, anxiety, fear, sadness, anger, 0 to 10, rate your anger. So we're just, rating each of the emotions. And if it gets positive, I might rate the positive ones too. Okay, so EFT, simple, rapid, effective brain-based approach to relieving stress, trauma, as well as other emotional, physical difficulties. It takes the charge out of emotions and physical symptoms, gentle, easy to learn. And now we're going to go into the history a little bit. So the stimulation of certain acupressure points on the body have been shown through fMRI scans and PET scans to calm the amygdala and stop the FFF response. Research shows that the hippocampus and other fear sensors in the body are very quickly affected and discharged. The result is that the memories are retained, but they no longer carry the emotional intensity and charge to trigger the trauma response that the body generally has to that. So when I'm talking to other therapists and I bottom line EFT tapping and I pull it more into the research and the concrete pieces, what happens when you're tapping is that you're going to create a prediction error for your brain at the end of the protocol. And that thing that you're talking about, that anxiety response, that trauma response, that anger, that sadness, when you're saying it, but your body is now presented in a calm space. So your brain's like, wait a minute, this response normally gives me this body reaction. Now this response is here and there's no body reaction. I need to reconsolidate this memory. I need to reprocess it. So what a lot of clients find on the back end of it is a couple days later, they're just like, it doesn't bother me the way it used to. Feels a little bit more like magic, but it's all about creating that paradox in the brain. If I'm going to just therapy it. So this is the research and trauma continued. So by gently tapping on the acupressure points, you trigger the body to do a bunch of things. 3 main things that EFT talks about. One is stimulate endorphin release in the brain, which reduces pain and slows the heart rate. The second is generating neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA, which help to reduce anxiety. And the third one is reduce cortisol levels by 37%. So whether or not you believe in the big shape of what EFT tapping is, there are physiological responses that occur that have been measured. So when I work with clinicians and they're like, well, I don't know about it. I was like, do you do progressive relaxation like with your clients? Yeah. Do you do breath work? Just do tapping. The science says these are the things that happen on the back end. So if that's what you're doing when you're doing your CBT, when you're doing all this stuff to, pull someone out of their space, just do this. Their cortisol levels are going to drop. That's just the science. That's what happens. So even if the person in front of you doesn't necessarily buy into it, I know that at the end of our time together, your cortisol levels are lower than when I got here. So I tell people, if you're already practicing one of these other relaxation models or meditative grounding models, just do one where the chemicals get shifted and there's numbers to back it. So again, I tell people it's not just palliative, there's stuff that you accomplish with it. All right, so these biochemical changes create rapid desensitization to the traumatic stimulus, and it's effective, and it's an effective treatment for fear because it terminates and disconnects that body's FFFF response. These are some of the numbers. So when we're looking at clinical EFT, cortisol levels are down 37%, immune system markers up 113, pain down 57, anxiety down 40, depression down 35, PTSD symptoms down 32, happiness, self-report up 31%, blood pressure down 8%, food cravings down 74%. And the effects on working with veterans with PTSD are similar to like EMDR or medication, except after the medication stops, the symptoms come back, versus with either EMDR or EFT, you'll notice that after 6 months of no treatment, the symptoms are still down. So that's some of the numbers. These are the studies that showed that EFT is effective for all of these things. So college students, veterans, pain patients, overweight individuals with food cravings, hospital patients, athletes, healthcare workers, gifted students, chemotherapy patients, phobia sufferers, and anxiety, depression, PTSD. Whew. Mouthful. How does it work? So I have a quickie video that's old if you want to watch it. And let's see if I can get that pulled up, which clearly it's not letting me click on anything. So that's always fun. So we'll skip the video for now since it's not working. So this goes into how it works. So stress begins in the amygdala. It's in the limbic system, midbrain, where emotions and long-term memories are encoded. The amygdala pops off, the FFF response starts. Tapping on the body's meridian points sends that calming signal to the amygdala, counteracting the stress of an anxiety-provoking event. Tapping resets the hippocampus, the part of the brain which compares past threats with present signals and tells the amygdala whether or not a threat is actually present. And EFT tends to be an eyes open technique. So the reason it's an eyes open technique is because as a practitioner, I'll give you an example. So when we look at the studies, we see that intense meditative work is not necessarily good for a lot of people who have severe trauma. And part of that is if my eyes are closed and I'm having an abreaction and I'm trapped in this horrible past event and I'm giving no external indicators, how as a clinician are you stopping that? How are you helping me? So that kind of situation is contraindicated for trauma survivors. EFT tapping is eyes open. So if I'm working with you as a practitioner, I'm going to notice when you dissociate. I'm going to see when you're not able to track. I'm going to be able to look at everything that's presented in front of me. And although the client navigates all of the content, I'm navigating the process. Does that make sense? So I'm the captain of the ship, even though they're giving me all the stuff. All right, so why do we use EFT? One, it's somatic, so it's body-based. So when we come with a client that is fully prepared and fully armed and fully defended right here, they're usually not ready for somatic work, which is fantastic because it's a nice, juicy green area where you get to play. It's also remarkably fast, and it updates the brain's learning pathways. More specifically, it reduces emotional and physiological suffering. It interrupts the flow of stress hormones and triggers the release of endorphins, re-regulates the client's physiology so that they're more available for therapy. If you're hijacked, you're not talking. When we think about how the body works, let's say I'm getting chased by a tiger. I'm not thinking about my taxes. I'm not thinking about my audit. I'm not thinking about all these other things. The prefrontal cortex shuts down a bit because I need to focus on surviving. So if I have a small kid in front of me, if I have an adult in front of me, and they are in one of these jacked up spaces, using talk therapy isn't going to pull them out of it easily. You got to work really, 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 really hard to make it happen. But if you teach someone some somatic release techniques and you can get them more in tune with their body and you can get them to ground, then their brain is more available for the talk therapy. So when I have my clinicians on my teams use EFT tapping, sometimes they use it as an ancillary service, it's like a secondary backup, or they'll just do straight EFT if that's what the client's more comfortable with, because you're not necessarily problem talking. They get to share a lot of their issues without getting into the nitty gritty of their issues. So the tapping points. So the tapping, again, has a continuum, just like all the other somatic practices. The points that I'm showing you are evidence-based tapping for traumatized community points. So this protocol was developed with Dr. Lori Leiden and Peter Stapleton to specifically work with communities so I'll just run through it. So Sandy Hook, Rwanda, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, Aboriginal tribes in Australia. So it started in Sandy Hook. They realized when you're going through EFT tapping, you'll see that the head point is usually the last point in other protocols. For the purposes of Sandy Hook and Rwanda, they just made it simpler. They just do top down. So everything starts at the head, ends at the gamut point. So that's the protocol you'll be learning today, or you'll be, getting familiarized with today. So if you go online, you'll see people do things in a different order. This is specifically evidence-based tapping for traumatized communities protocol. Really simple, a lot of research. There we go. So the points start with the side of the hand. We no longer call it the karate chop point because that can activate people sometimes. So it's the side of the hand is the first point. This is where we do our setup statement. And then it's top of the head, beginning of the eyebrow, side of the eyebrow, under the eye, nose, chin, collarbone, underarm, gamut point, which is that fleshy part in between your ring and pinky finger. The points are on both sides of your body, except for the ones that are in the middle. So again, if someone says, oh, I'm here, and then I'm going to flip over here, it's fine. It's mirrored on the body. The one clinical piece that I would tell you is if you're going to do the points, be mindful of the person's body in front of you. Sometimes it's easier to just reach across and do your underarm here. For people who tend to be larger in the chest area, it might be easier just to do the same side. That makes sense? Just functionally. All right, so teaching, demo, and practice. So when I'm giving the full presentation, it's a multi-day, like we're sitting here for 30 hours. Today, we're condensing everything, even though I'm reading off of my larger presentation. So there's a few protocols that we have in the evidence-based tapping for trauma. One's calm and contain. Calm and contain is this is your basics. This is where you start. This is where you end. So if someone starts to abreact and we're in the middle of another protocol, we abandon the protocol, bring it back to calm and contain. Calm and contain is just the points and focusing on the breath and grounding. So if I was tapping, I would do a 4-count breath in, 4-count breath out, and I would just take it through the points. I might use some hypnotic techniques like, feel the cool air going in, warm air going out, feel the chair on the back of your legs, feel the ground under your feet, just bringing them into the room. Look around, notice 3 things that are white, look around, notice 3 things that are blue. So all the stuff to just bring them into into the space again. So no matter what protocol you're in, if things start to go sideways, you go straight back to calm and contain. The basic EFT protocol is the protocol that has the cognitive statement attached to it. So I would say something to the effect of, I'll just prompt a little conversation. So, hey, Eddie, why did you come in today? What do you want to talk about? And just a few words, what's going on? I have a fear of flying. All right. So of all the aspects around flying, because there's lots of them, which one's the most alive for you right now in this moment? Yeah, I'm afraid that the plane's going to explode. All right. So you're afraid the plane's going to explode. When you think about that, 0 to 10, what's the level? They'd give me a number. I'd say, is there any emotion attached to that? They'd say, yes, anxiety or fear. Fear. Okay, fear. And how do you know it's fear? Where in your body you're experiencing? What's that sensation? It's a tightness in my chest. It feels like I can't breathe. Something like that. So I would start with just that little brief explanation, and I might do a statement that starts like, even though I have this anxiety, it's a tightness in my chest. It's at a, let's say the person said 7. I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Even though I have this anxiety about the plane blowing up. I deeply and completely love and accept myself. So the first part is the truth statement. So it's whatever the client comes up with. It's in the client's language. If the client says, you know, my husband's an asshole, even though my husband's an asshole, you match the client's language. We're not reframing. You don't, and you also don't switch up the words. Like if someone says my client's an asshole, I'm like, oh, my husband's a jerk. You don't change it. You just meet the client where they're at. The balancing statement, I landed on, I deeply and completely love and accept myself. It's not, the balancing statement is not intended to be a promise. So I would never say, and it's going to be okay, everything's going to be all right. I would never say anything like that. The balancing statement is kind of a preferred mindset. So, but it's got to be true. So even though this stuff is happening, I'm safe in this room right now. And it is what it is. And I deeply and completely love and accept myself. Now, if a client has problem, you know, saying, and I deeply love and accept myself as a preferred mind state, I might do a couple rounds on what's blocking them from being able to say that, because it's a nice place to land. I usually just lead with that one and modify it if they request, but it's, you know, I kind of stay there. Once we do the setup statement 3 times on the side of the hand, then it's just a reminder statement. When you're first learning how to do the EFT protocol, the reminder statement is super simple. It's just a piece of what it says. I have this anxiety. I have this anxiety living in my body. I have this anxiety about the plane blowing up, living in my body. I have this plane blowing up anxiety. Keep it really, really simple, really, really repetitive until you get the shape of how tapping is meant to be used. Because therapists are helpers and they tend to go really hopeful, really quick. They tend to reframe. They tend to do a lot of stuff. And the whole premise of EFT tapping is that you're staying with the client where the client's at. You know, you're getting their body calm in the face of this stimulus, or they're getting their body calm in the face of the stimulus. I'm not supposed to be helping. So help less. Stick to the protocol, keep it pedantic. When someone gives you a SUDS that's higher than a 5, you would not place it in the body. I wouldn't say, so how do you know you're experiencing anxiety, tightness in my chest? Because if they're saying I'm at a 10, I'm really not trying to bring them more into that. So I won't place the emotion in the body. There's a different protocol that we do when it's 6 or above. So when I talked about aspects, so the reason aspects are important is because this is probably the thing that makes EFT work the best or work the least, is your ability to identify an aspect. So if I say something like, I'm having anxiety about a bank loan, and I do tapping on bank loan, that's like a tabletop. It's a really, really broad issue. The person might feel calmer, but the effects are palliative. If I get to really get into the idea that the aspect that is bothering me the most about this bank loan is the way my wife is going to look at me if I don't get it. That's an aspect. You know, I think of aspects as a deli slicer, and I really want the thinnest slice. I want the thing that's most on fire, most alive for you in this moment. And clients will always say, well, there's another aspect popping up right now. And then you say, good, remember that, but let's finish what we're doing right now. So, you know, this is where you're managing the process, because people's minds will always take them other places, but you acknowledge it. You say, that's really important. Well, I'll circle back to it, but let's stick to where we're at. The reason I talk about aspects is because I talk about tabletops and I talk about buildings and construction. And in EFT tapping, one of the cool things about identifying aspects, the way I think about it, it's kind of like when you see a demolition crew taking down a big building. They are placing those bombs in very specific areas. If I find the right aspects, if I do this work really well, I could probably bring the whole building down with just a few sessions. Versus, let's say, talk therapy, where I'm really clearing out the building one level at a time. So again, that's why aspect work is important. Marquee is a distancing technique. So like I said, when someone gives you a SUDS that's 6 or above, I would use the marquee. And the marquee is what it is. It's like a movie screen, movie title. So I would vividly imagine all the things involved in the thing that you're telling me about. So let's say I have this fear that the airplane's going to explode. And they're like, and it's at a 10. Okay, great. If you think about all that's involved with the anxiety about the airplane exploding at a 10, and you had to put that into a movie title, what would that movie title be? And then they'd say, oh shit, it's happening. Let's say that's the movie title. And then I'm like, all right, so let's picture that movie title on a marquee outside of a movie theater. So picture it on the marquee. What do the letters look like? What does the marquee look like? What color are the letters? It's all vivid imagining. And then I'd say, okay, so where are you standing in relationship to this marquee? I'm just under it. Does that feel like a safe place to be? No, I would want to be further away. If you could use any means of your imagination to get as far away as you needed to, what would you use? How would you get there? How far away would you get? Oh, I'd be, 6 blocks away sitting in my car. Fantastic. Let's get there. Now, as you're looking at the marquee, 6 blocks away, does this feel like a safe place for you to be? Fantastic. And then I'd say, even though I've got this movie title, oh shit, it's happening. I deeply and completely love and accept myself. So it's the same as the other protocol, except I'm using the marquee movie title. And I keep referencing the movie title. So whatever they're saying, I say, whatever it is, movie title. Because again, I'm not trying to activate it. This is a distancing technique. The idea is that the reason I'm vividly imagining is because they just showed up with a 10 anxiety that the plane's going to blow up. Now they're at a 3 anxiety about the movie title, about the, oh shit, it's going to happen. So again, once I get them down to a 0 or 2, 0, 1 or 2, I can pull them back in and say, okay, so now when you think about that anxiety around it blowing up, what number are you at now? Hopefully they're in a more manageable number and I can take them through the regular protocol. Any questions so far? Because I'm jumping through like a lot of hours of training here. Yes, no, we're good? Okay. So we went through common, contain. We did the basic protocol, placing it in the body or not, depending on if the SUDS is above a 5. Aspects, which is that deli slicer. We did the marquee technique. The next story is the tell the story technique. So the tell the story technique is all about finding a calm point before the traumatic story. So I will use the MSD shooting, for instance. If I'm working with a child or even one of the parents, let's say one of the kids, I would say, all right, so can you think of a time in that day where there was no anxiety around the situation? Yes, when I woke up in the morning and had breakfast. Good. You're going to tell me the story of that day starting in that moment. So you woke up in the morning, you sat for breakfast. And then in tell the story, they're going through their day. But I am interrupting. I swear to you not, I'm interrupting like 2 times a sentence. So I'm asking, is there any intensity there? Is there any intensity there? Is there any intensity there? So if they're starting to tell the story, I sat down for breakfast, any intensity there? No. And then I got some eggs and ham, any intensity there? No. Then my mom walked into the room, any intensity there? No. So it's very interruptive, but it becomes background noise for your client. Your client's not going to feel interrupted. They'll say yes, no. Whenever there is any spike in an emotion, I'm going to do the basic protocol to pull it down and then start the story over from the beginning. Okay, so let's go back to when you woke up. And I'm going to ask all the same interruptive questions the whole way through. Here's an example. I was doing tell the story with a mom, and she was telling the story about when she was called because her son was in a motorcycle accident. It was still kind of hijacking her. And we got to a point where she, in the story, came to the accident site. And the intensity that she had was fear. And then we tapped it down, restarted the story. She got back to that same point. I asked the question again. And she said, yes, there's an intensity. Okay, so what's the emotion? She said, anger. And I was like, okay, because the first time around it was fear. There were multiple feelings around it. So she had fear, is my son dead? Under that, once we got that anxiety down, she had anger. What the hell was he thinking not wearing his helmet? So the reason it's important to keep checking in on all the same points is that each point in time can have multiple pieces to it. There could be a lot of layered emotional responses in each of those moments. So it's really important when you're doing tell the story to go all the way through, because it works kind of like this. It's a little bit like a pulse, up and down. I'm knocking down each of these points. When I'm doing tell the story with a client and we're doing their trauma narrative, I never want to, because there's little T's and big T's that kind of all accumulate. My goal as an EFT practitioner is that by the time you're telling me the story of what actually happened, you haven't had an emotional response before it. We've knocked all that stuff down. So when we finally get to that story, after all the different rewinds and flattening down those emotional peaks, we're actually just talking about the trauma. It's not this compounded thing from all the stuff that happened throughout the day. So when I compare it to TFCBT, for instance, when you do the trauma narrative and we're running through the thoughts, the feelings, the actions, all that stuff, that's a lot for a kid to hold, because they're telling the whole story of all the trauma straight through. With tapping, you're going to tell the whole story, but I'm making sure that every time you have a feeling, we're bringing your body back to normal. Bring it back down, bring it back down, bring it back down. So by the time we get to that hot part that all the therapists rush to, we're working with it really cleanly. It's not like the kid is already jacked up and now after all of the trauma, they're finally getting to the big juicy trauma. No, not doing that. So in my estimation, I tend to find that EFT tapping is a kinder, gentler way of exploring trauma. So the person in front of me isn't falling apart all the time. I'm really helping them navigate their physiology throughout the process, and I'm going really way slow, because fundamentally, to go fast, you got to go slow. I find that I do really good EFT trauma work when I slice that aspect really thin, when I go really slow, when I make sure that they can get through the whole narrative in a calm body. Okay, so that's the tell the story technique. And Shirley, fingers up.
This might be separate, and that's
Yeah.
why the training happens.
Mhm.
But when you said the in aspects, like other parts may come into it, like my
Mhm.
wife won't love me for the loan, but we skip that because we're focusing on this. But then when you're telling the story, you're pausing every second and checking in with it.
Yes.
So these are is it like you follow steps, so you do aspects before you tell the story, or you might flip it depending on the client?
Sort of. So the first 4 protocols, like calm, contain, basic EFT protocol, and aspects, all of that occurs when you're doing a tell the story. So tell the story is just a bigger shape of a therapeutic interaction. It's not a protocol. So when someone is telling their story, I'm using 1 through 4. Every time I hit a spike, I'm going to either do calm and contain, basic protocol, aspects, or marquee, depending on the number that they give me. Tell the story is just a bigger framework that all of those protocols fall into when I'm working with the trauma narrative. So generally when I do this training, I don't get to tell the story until day 2. So it's like we've done 8 hours of 1 through 4. And then day 2, we do tell the story, the boxing technique, and core issues, limiting beliefs. So you're getting a lot really condensed. Okay, so tell the story is really good. It takes a while to get used to, because you're interrupting a lot, and also you're not nosy. You're really staying with their story. So that therapist piece in your brain that wants to like dig down and, oh, there's juice here, we put a pause. We put a pause on it, and we kind of just stay right where we're at, and we go through the protocol. So the box technique is what you do when time runs out. So we borrowed from hypnosis, and the idea is, if you could imagine a container that could hold everything that's left of the issue that we've been dealing with today. Vividly imagine, what would that container look like? Does it have sides? What's it's made of? Does it have a top? Does it need a lock? Do we need to bury it? So all those things, take a moment, put everything inside of that container. Let me know when you feel like you've done that to completion. Is this a good place for us to stop today? So that's the box technique, or the container technique. Core issues and limiting beliefs. That is, I want to say the juicy part. EFT tapping works really good. If you're into core work, child work, all that other kind of stuff, then the core issues, limiting belief stuff is your jam. You're going to love it. When you do a core issue or limiting belief, so the difference between the two is a limiting belief is Oh, I can't find anyone to date. There's no good fish in the sea. A core issue would be, I would get to it. In EMDR, I would get to a core issue by saying, so when you think about there not being any good fish in the sea, what would that say about you? So, EMDR is very direct with getting to the core issues. And then they would say that I'm not lovable, I'm not a match. Okay, feeling that I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, I'm not a match, that's a core issue because it's something about the core of who you are. And so let's say I identify a core issue or limiting belief. I might do some tapping on it, get it down to like a 2, and then say, all right, so when you think about, not being good enough and it tingling in your chest, what's the earliest memory you have of this tingle in your chest around not being good enough? And usually at that point, the person will jump back to memory somewhere between 3 and 7. And then we would explore that, do all the same protocols with that memory, that story, whatever presents itself there, and kind of process through. The difference between the basic techniques and the core issues is at some point in core issues, I'm going to do the vividly imagine piece, but the vividly imagine is going to be, okay, so when you picture 7-year-old you, what do you look like? What are you wearing? What are your clothes? What's your hair like? What did people call you? I would do this whole vivid imagining of the younger self, and then I would prompt a conversation between the two, sort of. I'd say, all right, so what things did 7-year-old you, need or want, or that they couldn't say in that moment? And have that conversation. You kind of test to whether they're speaking as grown-up them or if they're speaking as 7-year-old them. And you can usually tell by language or the things that they say. But yes, core issues, limiting beliefs, there's a whole day of how to do that without leading the witness. And then these slides are breaking down each of the protocols. So calm and contain kind of breaks down how to do that. This is breaking it down when the sensation is 5 or below. Including the body sensation, creating a flexible balancing statement. This is when I was talking to you about the deeply love and accept myself. These are some other versions of it. Part B is I love and accept myself anyways. I know God loves me and accepts me. This is just the way it is right now. It's over and I'm safe now. So all of these things, the balancing statement always just has to be a true statement. It's never a promise. When we do the basic protocol, once we get to the gamut point, all the way back at the beginning, we ask a reframing question. So what's possible now? And, what's possible now that you're at a 2 around this issue? And they'll say, oh, well, maybe I can, talk to my mother in a calm state, or, they'll give you, the client will give you the reframe. What we want to avoid is therapist reframing for the clients. You got to always let the client get the reframe out themselves. And gosh, I don't know how to wrap this up without taking you to the advanced stuff. So since we're short on time, I'm going to open it up. Ask me all the clinical questions you want. I will give you all the answers that you need. You just got a 30-hour training in an hour. So it's like the thinnest of overviews for EFT tapping with some fat somatic stuff at the beginning. So you kind of get the difference between each, but the floor is yours. Are you having any questions? Shirley, I saw your finger. Go ahead. You could just talk.
I have multiple, so I'll go.
Yes, come on.
Well, I want to let everybody else ask, because I will take up the entire time.
You can if you need to. Your questions might be some of the ones they have. So you can start and then check it in between each of your questions. Is there anybody else?
Okay, yeah. So you mentioned EFT tapping and palliative care, and I know that you put in the chat box or in one of the slides about pain management. Is this something that's known for palliative care? Is it something that's like evidence, like something they'd like to utilize?
You mean for pain management? Yeah, there's a lot of research on
Oh,
pain
so you're not
management.
talking about palliative in terms
No, I'm
of
not talking about
life.
no.
You're just talking about pain management.
Yes.
And that actually, oh, I want to check in.
We're good. It's a small group. We're just a small group, so go ahead.
Because I work with a lot of people with chronic illness, and I'm thinking about fibromyalgia and how just touching certain areas will leave pain for longer than the touching. And I'm wondering how to ensure that it's not painful, or does the pressure matter? Can we just
the pressure matters a little bit, but not too much. They've done some studies in Australia around imaginal tapping, so focusing on the points while you're going through the protocol. And the benefit of the focusing on the points is because you are the moderator, you're managing the whole situation. Use your calmest voice as you're connecting and say, all right, now imagine you're tapping on the top of your head, beginning of your eyebrows. And you can do it in front of them so that they can see it. And then you're slowing it down. You're taking the deep breaths. In tapping, one of the things that, and again, I didn't go too far into it, but it's all about vagus nerve stimulation. So you want that diaphragmatic breathing from the belly. You're doing that deep 4 or 5 count breath inhale, 4 or 5 breath exhale, and you're monitoring the person's breath. If you're doing this via telehealth, the easiest way to do it is to have them straw breathe. So, because I want to hear it. If someone is starting to get lightheaded, they're not getting enough oxygen, tell them to have a bottle of water with them. All these things are helpful because in person, I can track by the shoulders going up, the chest, all that stuff. But when you're stuck in this little box, sometimes you need cheat codes. And the straw breath is the cheat code because I'll be able to hear it. And sometimes just go really slow and stay on one point longer. Just focus through maybe 2 or 3 of the inhale exhales. It's not a race. We're not trying to get to the gamut point as quickly as possible. We're trying to regulate the body in the face of this anxiety, sadness, anger, whatever the stimulus is.
Checking in.
Yeah.
I do have a quick question.
Yes.
So we are marriage and family therapists.
Yes.
We do couples and families.
Mm-hmm.
How is this used in the context of multiple people in the room?
Fantastic. This is wonderful. So I will have couples go along. So in tapping, they call it borrowing benefits. So if I were doing this, if we were in a little tapping situation, all of those biochemical changes that I talked about in the beginning, all of that relaxation, the GABA, the cortisol levels, all that stuff, it's happening all around. So we're borrowing benefits from somebody else's tapping in front of us. Also, what's good is if I'm in a couple situation and we're talking about anxiety and I'm discussing where she feels it in her body, this is all information that I'm privileging for other people in the system. So if, let's say, there's an argument at home or something's upset and he's just like, I see you're doing that thing again. Are you sad? Are you angry? Like they're learning each other's roadmaps, when it comes to that kind of emotional, physiological piece. A lot of times, in couples, they take each other at their word. I'm fine. And they'll know they're not fine. This gives you a lot of language around, is your chest tight right now? Yeah. Okay, so you're feeling something else, aren't you? So when we're in that head state, sometimes we're not acknowledging what's going on subtext. And when I have family members together, or even when I'm working with a kid and mom's there, that roadmap of how my kid feels and how he holds things in his body or how my partner holds things in their body is priceless. Because then when I'm doing just the regular couples work, I will pull all of that information in and I'll be like, so John, where do you think she's feeling this? Probably in her chest again. Okay. All right. So, and I was like, is that right, Sarah? And then, we'll play around with it. So the goal is you can do it on yourself. If I'm tapping on myself, I'm really lazy. Like I'll do the not thing. I'll sit in the shower and I will bring my attention to where the water's sitting. And I'll do the whole protocol just there. So even if I'm in my car and I'm just hitting the side of my hand on the steering wheel, there are ways to do it that are not as, going through the whole process. If you're at your desk at work, so again, these are just ways to make sure that you can self-regulate. These are ways to get the language and communication around how to talk about stuff. When you're in a couple, for instance, and I do a tell the story, and the husband witnesses or the wife witnesses that I'm not getting to the juicy part because there's a lot of other context first. It really generates patience in a way that you can't teach in regular talk therapy. Like you gotta slow down. So it's a really good slow down method for people who are always in a rush, for people who want that 5-minute, snippet when people are looking for those talking points. And this kind of is the antidote to all of that. So when I have a client who's talking at the pace that I was just talking 2 minutes ago, it pulls them out of that. It gets them out of that space. It kind of stops the ricochet and it keeps them in the moment. And it's a really beautiful thing when you see a couple experience that or witness it, and bringing it to the fore.
Thank you.
No problem. Sure. Shirley, you had more, or anybody else?
Yeah, I don't know if you have a time limit. Because
My next client is at 5:30, so that's my only hard stop.
you're in Colorado. Okay. I let you off.
Yes, yes.
So with brain spotting, because I know
Mhm,
about EMDR and the visual,
mhm.
either with brain spotting, if you're using a sound, is it always a sound, not a visual stimulation?
Yeah, the bilateral stimulation in brain spotting is generally the sounds because they're
Okay.
focused on you staying in one spot while you're doing all the
Okay.
processing.
Yeah, versus the hand or
Yes.
the light and things
Yeah,
like that.
or even the little butterfly.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
yeah, but it's the clicking. I've heard the clicking
Yes.
before. Yeah,
Yes.
okay.
Or knee
Um,
tapping for EMDR. Yeah, all that stuff.
got you. Oh yeah, generally the sound. And then you kind of surfaced this at the end, but I'm wondering how much does polyvagal theory come into play with understanding the body's responses?
It does a
Like,
little bit.
is it
You
helpful or necessary?
it's helpful, but it's not necessary. So you'll go through your entire like EFT training with you'll hear someone ask the question the way you asked it. Polyvagal theory did it, but it'll never be a slide. It'll never be something that they talk about overtly.
Mm, okay.
But they'll give it a nod. So yeah.
Pausing. Okay. Um, so I work with a lot of people that I forget the wording for it, but with autism and ADHD, we really struggle to have any imagination. That word where we can't visualize whatsoever. So I don't do guided meditations whatsoever because it's not possible. I
Mhm.
wonder if EFT tapping good for people that can't visualize or imagine things.
Yes, because you don't always have to do the imaginal piece. So for
Because you're talking
instance,
about the PTSD and the eye closing. So I'm wondering, is this a great alternative to that? You don't have to imagine anything. You just
yes,
follow along with what I'm guiding.
you just go slower would be my professional
Mm, okay,
suggestion.
that's a
So for
great.
instance, I introduced the marquee protocol for people
Mm-hmm.
because you need it until you get the hang of stuff. If someone gives me an 8, I might take them through the basic protocol. I might even place it in the body because I know I can hold that space as a clinician. For beginners, I give them the hard rule. When it's under 5, place in the body. When it's over 5, do marquee distancing technique. As you get more proficient, as you get used to things, you'll recognize that you can hold space different. It's almost like telehealth therapists who are like, oh, I don't do couples telehealth because if they explode, I don't know what to do. I see lots of couples telehealth. I'm 100% telehealth because I can hold that space. But that's really all about your ability, your capacity, your training, your comfort level. So
Mm-hmm.
as a general rule, I'll tell people if you're not going to do the imaginal pieces, go really slow.
And do the you mentioned this like with Sandy Hook, but do the plants matter?
The points are acupressure points. So they were selected for very specific reasons. Go ahead.
Are they like, is the structure important? So we start
Yes,
with the head and go
yes.
down.
The
Okay.
reason the structure is important is because it's the easiest to follow and remember. When
Oh,
Lori Layden was, spearheading the whole thing in Sandy Hook, I'll give you a super super sad example of tapping, but poignant. So working with one of the bus drivers, the thing that she was holding on to the most was I drove them to their death. Very hard for that person to get past. Through all of the tapping, through doing the tell the story, one of the reframes that the driver got to was that for the years that she was their driver before that, she made sure they were always safe. Blah, blah, so it was a different reframe. One of the parents didn't remember because there was an argument before the drop off. Just remember the argument through the tell the story. What's beneficial about tell the story, and this is why it's important to like tap down the spikes, is that biologically what'll happen is that hippocampus amygdala thing unfreezes and the prefrontal cortex comes back online. So what you'll recognize when tell the story is working good, every time they go back to tell the story at the beginning, more information starts to privilege itself. They'll start to remember what they had for breakfast. They'll start to remember the outfit that they wore. And all of these things were pieces that they could swear they didn't remember at the beginning. So when you're tapping down all those things and you keep rewinding, an example of tell the story with this mom is at one point in the retelling, she remembers leaning forward and telling her daughter that she loved her. For her, that was the fix. you know and when you're doing tapping, one of the other things that you do before tell the story is you'll say, okay, so when you even think about telling the story, is there anything going on in your body? And you do a full tapping and a calming to zero around just the anxiety or buildup of even going into the trauma narrative. The reason this is important, it's another case example that Lori went into in our training. She had a client who had gone through severe rape, just trafficking, all this stuff, and years of therapy, like 15 years of therapy, came to her, and she did as you even think about going into the trauma narrative, what's happening in your body. They did about 45 minutes of just getting her safe in her body. And for her, that was the one and done, because in the last 15 years, she had never felt safe in her body. All the therapy that she had done, it never got her to the place where that pre-question got her. So what Lori likes to say is, yeah, and could you imagine if I was nosy? She was like, I never found out what happened to her. Like, I kind of knew what happened to her by that beginning statement, but I never knew any of the details, because that's not what I needed. That's not what she needed. That's not what had to happen for her to get to her okay. For her, that pre-session of just getting into a safe body was all she needed. So Lori's like, yeah, if I was a nosy therapist, I would have been very disappointed. She's like, I have no idea what her story is. I just have that general header. But, she got what she needed that she didn't get for 15 years. Having talked through that rape narrative over and over and over and over. Imagine how many times she talked that narrative through in 15 years. And all she needed was to feel safe in her body. So it's one of those, one and done cool stories. They're not common, but when they pop up, they're poignant. Gina, you have your hand up?
I do. First of all, this is my first time hearing in detail about EFT, so it's very interesting. So thank you. It was a great presentation. So I was following along and how you're talking about telling the story, and you don't want to go digging. You just want to be able to continue to tell the story. So I get all that part. But when you got to the point where you're talking about core issues and limiting belief, you were talking about like sort of, okay, so track me back. When did you first experience that? So I guess the two questions with that, because to me, that sounds like just a little bit of digging. And so I would want to know, when as a therapist, do you do that part? Because
when it presents itself organically.
Okay. And then when you do that, are you going back and saying, tell me the story, but it's from that first experience?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure I'm tracking that right.
It's kind of like, a story and a story and a story. So if I'm doing a general story and then I do a float back and then there's another something. Yeah. So tracking all that stuff, keep a notepad sometimes if you find that you're really far down the rabbit hole. Okay. But I like to keep the loops really short in the beginning. Okay. As you get more proficient with tapping, you'll be able to hold how many loops you're in. Okay. But it's very easy to get lost if you go too fast is the point. So for I don't do it like truffles, where I'm just this little pig waiting for the core issue to pop up. But if the nugget falls in my lap in the middle of a session where a core belief about I'm not good enough comes up, okay, let's go back. Let's tap this down, then let's do the float back. Let's explore what this is connected to. I'll give you an autobiographical answer response. So I did a tapping, and then my tap person was just like, so in my marriage, I'd come home, I was really irritated. I felt like my spouse wasn't listening to me. I was just super, super angry. And so I was like, let me do some tapping on this. So I got with one of my tapping people, and they were just like, all right, anger in your chest at whatever, a 3. When you think about, that anger about not being heard at a 3, what's your earliest memory? And what was interesting is emotional resonance versus mental resonance. What I would have thought not listening connected to, different story. What I ended up going back to for the first 5 minutes of, I don't know why this memory's in my head right now. So it was a story that I always told about survival. So I was a little kid at a family party. I got caught in an undertow. I fought my way out. It was always the story of survival. I've told the story a million times. It's like a back pocket story, bam. And then I got to this place around not being listened to. And I was like, I don't know why this memory is the one that's popping up. And she was like, all right, so what did little Eduardo look like? What was he wearing? Blah, blah. So I'm telling the whole thing. What did Eduardo need to say that he couldn't? And then I was sitting there, and being me, I was just like, everyone I love is just this far away from me. Nobody's seeing me drown. Never thought about the story from that way. Never at all. So then there was this whole juxtapositioning. So what are the skills and resources that grown-up Eduardo has that he's offering to, 6-year-old Eduardo? And, and what are the promises that he's making, blah, blah, blah. How does little Eduardo know that he can even trust you? So there's this whole conversation that you're prompting back and forth. And at one point I was just like, I got you. I see you. Nobody else needs to see you. I see you. So that was like the place where I got to with it. And it pulls me back. So now what's possible when you think about the current situation, blah, blah, blah. And I said something, I don't have to be so mad at that. So it didn't feel like anything magical, but it was amazing that I went to that memory. Fast forward to a week later, and the same thing happened with my spouse. That has always happened, that has always triggered this huge response. And I found myself responding like a normal person because 6-year-old me wasn't there screaming as well. So every part of me that had felt not listened to shows up when grown-up Eduardo feels not listened to. So what was interesting was when I did that core work, grown-up Eduardo had a grown-up response to being ignored. I didn't have this extra fire with me. So I went back to my tapping person. I was like, yeah, I thought I had a good session, but I didn't recognize the payoff until the anger wasn't there the next time the stimulus presented itself. And that stimulus presented itself every time. I've been with my partner for 18 years. Every time it's been Eduardo on a 10. Like, what? And then Eduardo showed up at a solid 2. And I was like, what? And then I was like, I tapped on this stuff. And that's when I was like, okay, all right, there's something here. But it's interesting because you'll have that experience when you're tapping with your clients where it'll be a good session, but the magic doesn't happen until the next time where they're just like, wow, I went through this without the anger, or I went through this without sadness or anxiety. Yeah. So I've worked with people doing pre-surgery. I've worked with people, in pregnancy. I've worked with people in just trauma stuff. So I've done situational tapping, also done issue tapping. LMFT is where I land. So sometimes I will do a tapping session and do the bad thing, which is like shift over. Because, sometimes you want to keep fidelity. And then other times just something has presented itself where you're just like, okay, there's 10 minutes left in session. I don't want to just container this. Let me just gut punch it a little bit and, do some systems work. Like now that we've got a little bit of a reframe going and you see things different, let's pull it into talk therapy. So yes, you can use it as an ancillary extra bonus. You can do tapping on its own separate. When I've run teams of clinicians, there'll be LMFTs, LMHCs, LCSWs. I let them pick and borrow as needed, but I always make sure that they do the EFT tapping clean. Like, don't come with an agenda, don't come leading, don't come reframing or reworking for the client. Like, do it right if you're going to do it. And then, borrow the benefits into other parts of the therapeutic experience. So was that a good example for you guys? I know I just ranted a little bit, but I thought an autobiographical piece might be helpful.
Yeah, no, it was really good. And actually it resonated with me just when I was in my program and we were running through some just scenarios in class and role playing. I remember us just role playing and a memory came back in my mind, and it's been a memory from when I was younger, and that it's one of those things where I pull it out. So I know where the stress comes from. Sorry, that's my dog. He wants some attention. Bo, can someone call Bo, please?
It's all right. He was louder for you than for us. So you're good.
Okay. Yeah, so it was really interesting because I'm like, okay, here comes this memory again. I know what it is. But I think that because of the work that I had done through the assignments and through the learning, all those louder emotions and higher reactions calmed down. And then all of a sudden there was an aspect of this memory that surfaced, and I was like, oh, just like you said, I was like, oh, this is what's really bothering me about this. It's like, and the interesting thing was, it was like, yeah, people in leadership bother me because of, it resonates back to something, that my parents did or didn't do, but I had never been able to hear that over all the years because of all the other noise. So, yeah, it's just that whole taking time for the top layers of the emotions and giving those emotions and those experiences a voice. And then even when you get down to kind of like those buried emotions, saying, okay, because as children, sometimes we don't have that voice to say it, right? So it all stays internally. But when we hit on these points now, and as therapists, when we recognize, okay, there's a moment where this is coming up, it's like, now's your moment for that child to say
Mhm.
something that they never did. And it's okay to say it. And it is very empowering and it's very freeing. And I had the same experience like you, like I went back to a same scenario and I'm like, okay, I'm not as mad as I was, but I'm like, that's because I know where it's connected to,
Yeah.
and I'm able to reassure myself. So thank you for just your own personal experience and sharing that and just helping me understand where that little loophole goes and to go
Mhm.
with it, and then to go back to like the bigger story until they kind of go off. So thank you, very helpful.
Of course, no problem. Shirley, go ahead. Got the finger.
Final two. They're just like check-ins,
That's good.
basically.
That's good.
Is EFT tapping different from TAT because it has the therapeutic modality? Because
Yeah. It's different points. It's got the therapeutic modality and it's got the fMRI studies. So the protocols. And here's the other thing. When you do your own research on EFT tapping, like I said, it has a spectrum. Some people are doing matrices and they're doing essential oils and they're doing all of this other stuff. And I don't minimize any of that. But as a person who's done agency work and written grants for programs and stuff like that, I stick to the stuff that has the science. I've seen people who swear by the other stuff. Fantastic. I don't down it. But I like to be able to point and cite sources.
that's a good reframe because I have a lot of clients that are very spiritual
Yeah.
and like to do more Eastern work,
Mhm.
and so they want to do all those conversation. Whereas have other people I work with, neuroqueer folks, mostly autistic and ADHDers,
Mhm.
and so some of them are just like, "Fuck no, that's not science. I will ignore all of it." And
Mhm.
so you can utilize both of what they need.
Yes.
You can do EFT with the logic brainers, and you can do EFT within the gemstones and the crystals and
Yes.
the things like that. Okay,
1000%.
perfect. And I'm pretty sure you answered this already, but I just want to make sure. Because with telling the story and trauma and how memories impact trauma, it's so stunted. When you said, "Tell me what you ate for breakfast," I'm like, they're supposed to remember breakfast? And but what you're saying is you're because we're not probing,
Yep, we're not
so
probing at all.
so whatever story they have, we build off of that. And as we go
Yes.
through it more memories come up, and the
Yes.
important things, like they don't need to remember they had eggs for breakfast unless they killed a chicken on the way home or something like that. So like what matters will resurface
Yes. And as a
automatically.
clinician, I look for it like we do in regular therapy, like little micro tells. So people will start yawning. Sometimes they'll burp, pass gas. There's lots of releases that happen when you're doing somatic work. But one of the things that lets me know that I've got traction is their narrative gets richer each time they go through the retelling. And I'm like, there's a prefrontal cortex. There we are. You're starting to remember stuff that you didn't know you knew. And it just lets me know that their body is regulating. I don't have to check in every 5 minutes. The story is the proof. So that's why I don't have to dig.
Thank you.
No problem. And then Annalyn has the handouts and the PowerPoint and stuff like that.
Can you
Yes.
send us the YouTube thing that didn't work? I wanted to watch the video. If you or
Oh,
Annalyn
yeah,
has the link.
it's really
I've seen
short
a
and
lot of
it's
them,
a
but
video from like 15 years ago. So it's just a woman tapping who had a fear of a tarantula before. So it's not
oh, okay. So any tap, because I've looked at
yeah,
tapping videos. I wanted to know what you specifically.
yeah.
Okay, it's
Oh,
not specific.
funny side story, because I think Gina, you brought up that you were talking about something at work, a stressor at work or something like that. So I did tapping recordings for my certification. And one of the recordings was a stressor with a colleague at work. And what's interesting is because I did that and it was all the years past and I just had all the audio files, when I was doing the trainings, I was like, and here's an example of, me doing a tapping with my staff. And it was the recording of me talking about a colleague. So just funny side story. I was able to, kind of get rid of the anxiety around it. But yeah, just be careful. Because when you let stuff go, you forget, oh, that exists. But it was just, yeah, it left my training circulation folder. So it was just the one embarrassment piece, but it was good. It was good. I like it. I enjoy it. I still do my systems work. I still work with couples. I pull it up as I need it. I do it as a modality standalone when it's at a request. But most of the time I'm, popping in and out of it.
Well, thank you, Eduardo. This has been lightning speed of what
Yeah.
is normally a multi-day.
Yes.
So this is a good teaser, a good marquee
Mhm.
for what could happen if someone wanted to do the longer training. So thank you very much.
Awesome. It was great meeting you guys. Yes, email me if you have